The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky peaks of Colorado when the first alien ship appeared in Earth's sky. Commander Vextar stood 8 feet tall on the bridge of his warship, his natural armor plates gleaming under the artificial lights. His yellow eyes studied the blue planet below with the confidence of someone who had conquered 17 worlds before this one. "Another primitive world," he said to his second-in-command, Captain Zareth. "Look at their crude metal structures and their weak electromagnetic signals. This should be over within hours." Captain Zareth nodded, her own armored form towering beside him. The Zephyrian race had evolved from apex predators, and their bodies showed it. Sharp claws extended from their fingertips, their skin was thick as leather, and their muscles could crush stone. They had never met a species that could match their physical power. "The target is a small military outpost in the mountains," Zareth reported. "Thermal readings show only 12 of the creatures inside. They appear to be armed with projectile weapons." Vextar laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Projectile weapons? Do they throw rocks at each other?" He turned to his communications. "Officer, send the surrender demand. Tell them to lay down their weapons and submit to the Zephyrian Empire. Make it clear that resistance will result in their destruction." Far below, in a concrete bunker built into the mountainside, Sergeant Jake Morrison received the alien transmission. The message came through every radio, television, and communication device in the facility. The voice was mechanical, translated by some kind of computer system. "Primitive humans of Earth, you are now subjects of the Zephyrian Empire. Lay down your weapons and submit to our authority. You have 1 hour to comply. Resistance is futile." Jake looked around the command center at his 11 soldiers. They were young, most of them fresh out of basic training. Private Danny Martinez was barely 19. Corporal Lisa Brooks had been in the Army for only 2 years. None of them had ever seen real combat. "Sergeant, what do we do?" asked Private Martinez, his voice shaking as he stared at the massive alien ship hovering above them. Jake studied the faces of his soldiers. He could see the fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. Determination. These were American soldiers, and they had sworn an oath to defend their country and their planet. "We do our job," Jake said simply. "We're soldiers. We fight." "But sir," Lisa said, "look at the size of that ship. They've got technology we can't even understand." "Maybe we should." "Should what?" Jake interrupted. "Give up? Hand over our planet? To alien invaders without firing a shot?" He shook his head. "That's not who we are. That's not what we do." The hour passed quickly. The soldiers prepared their weapons, checked their ammunition, and said their prayers. They knew they were probably going to die, but not one of them suggested surrender. When the alien landing craft descended toward the outpost, Jake was ready. The craft was sleek and silent, about the size of a school bus. It landed in the clearing. Outside the bunker, and a dozen alien warriors emerged. Commander Vextar stepped out first, his massive form casting a shadow in the afternoon sun. He had expected to find the humans cowering in terror, begging for mercy. Instead, he heard the sharp crack of rifle fire. The first bullet struck his chest armor and bounced off harmlessly. The second and third shots hit the same spot, creating small scratches in the metal. Vextar laughed and raised his plasma rifle, a weapon that could melt through steel. "Foolish creatures," he said. "You cannot harm us with your primitive weapons." But the humans kept firing. They took cover behind rocks and trees, moving from position to position like they had done this before. Their bullets could not penetrate Zephyrian armor, but they aimed with deadly precision, hitting the joints and weak points where the armor plates met. Jake watched through his scope as one of the aliens stumbled when a bullet found the gap in his knee armor. The creature did not fall, but it slowed him down. That gave Lisa a chance to throw a grenade. The explosion knocked 2 aliens off their feet. Their armor protected them from death, but Jake saw something in their movements that surprised him. They were shaken. These creatures had expected easy prey, not organized resistance. "Keep firing," Jake shouted. "Aim for the joints. Make every shot count." The battle lasted for 3 hours. The aliens had superior weapons and armor, but the humans had something else. They had knowledge of the terrain, and they had the will to fight even when victory seemed impossible. Private Martinez died first, cut down by a plasma blast while trying to reload. He did not cry out or beg for mercy. He simply fell forward. His rifle still in his hands, Corporal Brooks was next, killed while trying to reach a wounded soldier. She had run across open ground under enemy fire to help a fallen comrade. The aliens watched in confusion as she died trying to save someone else instead of herself. One by one, the humans fell. But each death seemed to make the survivors fight harder instead of giving up. They used every trick they knew, every piece of cover, every advantage they could find. When Jake finally fell, only 3 humans remained alive. They were wounded and running low on ammunition, but they were still fighting. The aliens had lost 4 of their own warriors, something that should have been impossible against such primitive opponents. Commander Vextar stood over Jake's body, his yellow eyes filled with confusion rather than triumph. In 17 previous conquests, the enemy had always surrendered when faced with superior force. They had begged for mercy, offered tribute, or simply fled in terror. But these humans had done something different. They had fought as if they expected to win, even when they clearly could not. They had died protecting each other, giving their lives for soldiers they had known for only months or years. "Commander," Captain Zara said, her voice uncertain, "the facility is secure. We have 3 prisoners." Vextar looked at the captured humans. They were wounded and exhausted, but their eyes still held defiance. The youngest one, Private Martinez, was bleeding from a head wound but still glared at his captors with undisguised hatred. "Why did you not surrender?" Vextar asked. "You knew. You could not win. Why did you choose to die?" Jake, barely conscious but still alive, looked up at the alien commander. His voice was weak but clear. "Because this is our home. Because those are our people. Because that's what soldiers do." The alien stared at him for a long moment. In 17 worlds, he had never heard an answer like that. Other species fought for territory, for resources, for survival. But these humans seemed to fight for something else, something he did not understand. "Take them to the ship," Vextar ordered. "I want to study these creatures. There is something about them that does not make sense." As the surviving humans were dragged away, Vextar remained in the ruined outpost. He looked at the bodies of his fallen warriors, then at the human dead. The exchange rate should have been 100 to 1 in favor of the Zephyrians. Instead, it was nearly even. He activated his communication device and sent a message to his superiors. "The human outpost has been secured," he reported. "However, I recommend we proceed with extreme caution. These creatures are not like the others we have faced." He did not mention that for the first time in his military career, he had felt something he had never experienced before while fighting the humans. For just a moment, when that young human had run across open ground to help his comrade, Vextar had felt what could only be described as respect for his enemy that troubled him more than he cared to admit. Jake woke up as the sun began to rise over the desert. His whole body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, and his mouth felt like it was full of sand. The survival blanket had kept him warm during the cold night, but it couldn't make sleeping on rocks comfortable. He sat up and looked around at the strange geometric patterns carved into the stone formations around him. In the morning light, they looked even more mysterious than they had the night before. The symbols were definitely not random scratches. They had meaning, purpose, and a kind of beauty that made Jake think of advanced mathematics, or maybe music. Written in stone. Jake ate one of his food bars and took a careful sip of water. He had 2 bottles left, which meant he had maybe a day and a half before he would start to get desperate. The emergency beacon was still sending out its weak signal, but he hadn't heard any response on his radio. He was completely alone on this dead world. After packing up his gear, Jake started to explore the rock formations more carefully. The patterns seemed to point in different directions, like a map or a set of instructions. Some of the symbols were repeated in different places, which suggested they might be some kind of language or code. Jake wished he had paid more attention in his xenoarchaeology classes at the Academy. As he walked around the formations, Jake noticed that some of the patterns seemed to point toward a distant cliff face about 3 miles away. The cliff was tall and dark, rising up from the desert floor like a giant wall. It was the only major landmark visible from where he stood, and Jake decided it was worth investigating. The walk to the cliff took him most of the morning. The sun was getting hot again, and Jake had to stop frequently to rest in whatever shade he could find. His water supply was getting lower, and he was starting to worry about dehydration. But the strange patterns in the rocks kept him going. They were clearly pointing him towards something important. As he got closer to the cliff, Jake could see that it wasn't just a natural rock formation. The stone face was too smooth, too regular. It looked like it had been cut and shaped by tools, though on a scale that would have required enormous machines. The cliff rose up about 500 feet from the desert floor, and it stretched for miles in both directions. Jake reached the base of the cliff and stopped to rest in its shadow. The stone was dark gray, almost black, and it felt cool to the touch. When he looked closely, he could see that the surface wasn't completely smooth. There were faint lines and patterns carved into it, so subtle that they were almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. He followed the base of the cliff for about a mile, looking for anything unusual. The patterns in the stone seemed to get more complex as he walked, and Jake began to suspect that he was looking at some kind of enormous building or structure, rather than just a natural cliff face. Then he saw it, hidden in a fold of the cliff face, almost invisible from any distance, was what looked like an entrance. It was about 20 feet wide and 30 feet tall, perfectly smooth and oval-shaped. The stone around it was covered in the same geometric patterns that Jake had seen in the rock formations, but these were much more complex and detailed. Jake approached the entrance carefully. As he got closer, he could see that the patterns around the opening were actually glowing with a very faint blue light. The glow was so dim that it was almost invisible in the bright sunlight, but it was definitely there. The entrance itself was blocked by what looked like a solid wall of the same dark stone as the cliff face. There was no obvious way to open it, no handles or buttons or controls that Jake could see. He pressed his hands against the stone, feeling for any hidden mechanisms, but found nothing. Jake stepped back and looked at the patterns around the entrance again. They seemed to pulse slightly with that faint blue light, like a slow heartbeat. He had the strange feeling that the entrance was somehow alive, or at least powered by some kind of energy source. He tried everything he could think of. He pushed on different parts of the stone wall. He traced the patterns with his fingers. He even tried talking to it, feeling a little foolish but desperate enough to try anything. Nothing worked out. Jake was about to give up when he noticed something different. The patterns around the entrance were starting to glow a little brighter. The blue light was becoming more visible, even in the bright desert sun. And there was a sound so low and quiet that he almost missed it. It was like singing, but not made by any human voice. The stone wall began to change. The solid surface started to ripple like water, and then it began to split down the middle. The two halves of the wall slid apart smoothly and silently, revealing a dark passage beyond. Cool air flowed out of the opening, carrying with it a strange, sweet smell that reminded Jake of flowers he had never seen. Jake stared at the open entrance in amazement. Whatever technology had built this place was far beyond anything humans had developed. The wall hadn't just opened. It had somehow become liquid and then solid again in a new shape. It was like watching magic. He checked his pistol to make sure it was ready, then stepped through the entrance into the passage beyond. The walls were made of the same dark stone, but they curved and flowed like they had been grown rather than built. The ceiling was high above his head, and the floor was perfectly smooth. Soft blue light came from somewhere in the walls themselves, providing just enough illumination to see by. Jake walked forward slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet passage. The air was cool and fresh, much better than the hot, dry atmosphere outside. He could hear the soft sound of air circulation, which meant the place was still powered and functioning after who knew how many years. The passage curved gently to the left, and Jake found himself in a larger chamber. The walls here were covered in more of the geometric patterns, but these were different from the ones outside. They seemed to move and shift as he watched, like they were alive. The blue light was brighter here, and Jake could see that it came from crystals. Embedded in the walls and ceiling. In the center of the chamber was a circular platform about 10 feet across. The platform was raised about 3 feet off the floor, and it was covered in symbols that Jake didn't recognize. As he approached it, the symbols began to glow with the same blue light as the walls. Jake climbed onto the platform and immediately felt a strange tingling sensation, like a mild electrical current running through his body. The symbols around him glowed brighter, and suddenly the entire chamber was filled with a soft, musical humming sound. Then the platform began to move. It rose smoothly into the air, carrying Jake up toward the ceiling. But instead of hitting the stone above, the ceiling opened like the entrance had, revealing another passage. The platform carried him up through the opening into a vast space beyond. Jake found himself in an enormous chamber that stretched away into darkness in all directions. The walls were covered in more of the flowing, organic patterns, and the blue light from countless crystals provided a soft, dreamlike illumination. The air was warm and perfectly comfortable, and Jake could hear the sound of running water somewhere in the distance. This wasn't just a building or a structure. It was a city, or maybe a ship, or maybe something that humans didn't even have a word for. It was beautiful and strange and completely alien, but it felt somehow welcoming. Jake had the odd sensation that he was expected here, that this place had been waiting for him. The platform settled gently onto a walkway that extended out into the vast chamber. Jake stepped off and looked around in wonder. Wherever he was, whoever had built this place, they had been far more advanced than humans. And somehow, impossibly, their technology was still working after centuries, or maybe millennia of abandonment. Jake started walking along the walkway, deeper into the alien facility. He had come looking for shelter and maybe water. Instead, he had found something that would change everything he thought he knew about the universe. Jake walked along the curved walkway deeper into the alien facility. The blue light from the crystals in the walls cast strange shadows that seemed to dance and move as he passed. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the vast space, making him feel very small and very alone. The walkway led him past rooms and chambers that he couldn't begin to understand. Some were filled with what looked like machinery, though it was unlike any technology Jake had ever seen. The devices were smooth and organic, like they had grown instead of being built. They hummed softly with power, their surfaces covered in the same flowing patterns that decorated the walls. Other rooms contained what might have been furniture, though it was designed for beings who were definitely not human. The chairs were too tall and too narrow, and they seemed to be made of the same living stone as the walls. Jake wondered what kind of people had lived here, and how long ago they had disappeared. As he walked, Jake noticed that the air was getting warmer and more humid. He could smell something like flowers and spices, and he could hear the sound of water flowing somewhere ahead. The blue light was getting brighter too, and he began to see other colors mixed in with it, soft greens and purples that reminded him of the aurora back on Earth. The walkway opened into another large chamber, this one filled with what looked like a garden. Plants grew from beds of crystal soil, their leaves and flowers glowing with their own soft light. Water flowed in streams that seemed to defy gravity, flowing upward and around corners in impossible spirals. The air here was sweet and clean, and Jake felt better than he had since the crash in the center of the garden was a raised platform, and on that platform stood something that made Jake stop and stare. It was a chamber made of transparent crystal, about the size of a small room. Inside the chamber, Jake could see a figure lying on what looked like a bed. The figure was humanoid, but clearly not human. It was tall and slender, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Its hair was long and silver, flowing around its head like it was underwater. It was wearing robes that seemed to be made of light itself, shifting and changing color as Jake watched Dot as Jake approached the crystal chamber. He realized that the figure was female. Her features were delicate and beautiful, with high cheekbones and long, pointed ears. Her eyes were closed, and she was breathing slowly and peacefully. She looked like she was sleeping, but Jake had the feeling that this was something more than ordinary sleep. Around the base of the crystal chamber were panels covered in symbols that Jake was beginning to recognize. They were the same geometric patterns he had seen throughout the facility, but these were more complex and detailed. Some of them were glowing brightly, while others were dim or dark. Jake walked around the chamber, studying the sleeping figure inside. She looked young, maybe in her 20s by human standards, though Jake had no idea how alien aging worked. There was something about her that seemed familiar, though he was sure he had never seen her before. As he completed his circuit around the chamber, Jake noticed that some of the symbols on the panels were starting to change. They were glowing brighter, and new patterns were appearing. The chamber itself began to hum with a low, musical tone that seemed to resonate in his bones. The crystal walls of the chamber began to shimmer and fade, becoming transparent and then disappearing entirely. The figure inside stirred, her breathing becoming deeper and more regular. Her eyes opened, and Jake found himself looking into pupils that were violet-colored and seemed to hold the depth of space itself. The alien woman sat up slowly, her silver hair falling around her shoulders like liquid metal. She looked at Jake with curiosity but no fear, as if she had been expecting him. When she spoke, her voice was soft and musical, but the words were in perfect English. "Hello, Jake Morrison," she said, and her voice carried a slight accent that Jake couldn't identify. "I have been waiting for you for a very long time." Jake stared at her in shock. You know my name? You speak English?" The alien woman smiled, and Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Her smile was beautiful and sad at the same time, like someone who had been alone for too long. "I know many things about you and your people. My name is Lyra. I am the last princess of the Ethereal Covenant." "Ethereal Covenant?" Jake repeated. "I've never heard of it." "That is not surprising," Lyra said as she stood up from the bed. She was tall, almost as tall as Jake, and she moved with a grace that seemed to defy gravity. "My people have been gone for a very long time. I have been sleeping here, waiting for the prophecy to be fulfilled." "What prophecy?" Jake asked. Nothing about this situation made sense. He had crashed on what was supposed to be a dead planet, found an alien facility that was still working, and now he was talking to a princess who had been waiting for him specifically. Lyra walked to the edge of the platform and gestured for Jake to join her. "Please sit. There is much I need to tell you, and I fear we do not have as much time as I would like." Jake climbed onto the platform and sat across from her. Up close, he could see that her skin had a subtle pattern of markings that looked like constellations. Her eyes were incredibly expressive, and Jake found himself thinking that she was the most beautiful person he had ever seen, human or otherwise. 500 years ago, Lyra began, my people were at war with an ancient enemy. The Void Collective had been hunting us across the galaxy, destroying our world and enslaving our people. We knew that we could not defeat them alone. "So what did you do?" Jake asked. "Our greatest prophet, a seer named Kepher, had a vision. He saw the future, and in it he saw salvation coming from a young race that was just beginning to reach for the stars. He saw brave warriors who would not give up, no matter how impossible the odds. He saw humans." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. But humans have only been in space for a few hundred years. How could your prophet know about us 500 years ago? "Time is not always linear," Lyra said with a sad smile. Kepher could see across centuries, across possibilities. He saw that humanity would rise to become a power in the galaxy, and that our two peoples would join together to face the darkness that threatens all life. And you've been waiting here all this time? Yes, the prophecy was very specific. It said that a warrior would fall from the sky onto this world, and that he would awaken me from my long sleep. It said that this warrior would be the bridge between our peoples, the one who would carry the knowledge of my civilization to yours. Jake looked around at the incredible technology surrounding them. What kind of knowledge? Everything, Lyra said simply. The secrets of faster-than-light travel, of energy manipulation, of healing and life extension. The weapons and defenses that could protect your people from the Void Collective. The wisdom we gain over millions of years of existence. Why? Me? Jake asked. I'm just a pilot. I'm not a diplomat or a scientist or a general. I crashed here by accident. There are no accidents in the pattern of the universe, Lyra said. You are here because you were meant to be here. The prophecy chose you, Jake Morrison, not because of what you are, but because of what you will become. Jake felt overwhelmed by the weight of what she was telling him. I don't understand. What am I supposed to become? The first human to master ethereal technology, the bridge between our peoples. The one who will lead humanity into a new age. Lyra reached out and took his hand in hers. Her skin was warm and soft, and Jake felt a strange tingling sensation where they touched. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, he said honestly. No one ever is, Lyra replied. But readiness is not what matters. What matters is courage and the willingness to do what must be done. The prophecy would not have chosen you if you did not possess these qualities. Jake looked into her violet eyes and saw centuries of loneliness and hope. This beautiful alien princess had been waiting for him for 500 years, trusting in a prophecy that said he would come. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing. What happens now? He asked. Now, Lyra said, you must learn about my people, about the technology in this facility, about the threat that is coming. And I must learn about humanity, about the people who will inherit my civilizations. Legacy. She stood up and walked to the edge of the platform, looking out at the vast chamber around them. But first, you must rest and recover from your crash. You will need all your strength for what is to come. Jake stood up beside her, still trying to process everything she had told him. Lyra, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you really the last of your people? Lyra was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was filled with ancient sadness. Yes, I am the last ethereal in the universe. When I die, my people will be truly gone forever. Unless ... Unless what? Unless I can pass on what we were to humanity. Unless I can help your people become what we once were, but better. That is why I waited so long, Jake Morrison. Not just for you, but for the hope that my people's legacy will live on. Jake felt the full weight of the prophecy settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a crash pilot trying to survive on a hostile world. He was humanity's first contact with an ancient alien civilization, and somehow he was supposed to help save both their peoples from a threat he didn't. Lyra led Jake through the facility to a room that she called the Hall of Memory. The walls here were covered in what looked like mirrors, but as they approached, Jake realized they were actually screens showing moving images. The pictures were so clear and detailed that they seemed more real than reality itself. This is how we preserve our history, Lyra explained, touching one of the screens with her fingertips. Every important moment of our civilization is recorded. Here, I want to show you what we were, so you can understand what we lost. The screen she touched began to glow brighter, and suddenly Jake was looking at an image of a city that took his breath away. Buildings made of crystal and light rose into the sky like frozen music. Flying vehicles moved between them in graceful patterns, and beings that looked like Lyra walked on platforms that floated in the air. This was Veltar, our capital city, Lyra said softly. It was built on a world where the sky was always purple, and 3 moons danced in the heavens. 5 million of my people live there in perfect harmony. It's beautiful, Jake said, and he meant it. The city was unlike anything humans had ever built. It seemed to grow organically, like a living thing, but it was clearly the product of incredible technology and artistic vision. We were a peaceful people, Lyra continued, moving to another screen. This one showed ethereals working together in what looked like laboratories and workshops. We spent our time creating art, exploring the mysteries of the universe, and helping younger civilizations learn to reach for the stars. Jake watched as the images showed ethereals teaching other alien species how to build ships and use advanced technology. You were like teachers to the galaxy. Yes, that was our calling. We believed that knowledge should be shared, that all intelligent life deserved the chance to grow and flourish. Lyra's voice was filled with pride, but also with deep sadness. We were wrong about one thing, though. We thought that all intelligent life wanted to create and build. We didn't understand that some beings only wanted to destroy. She moved to a larger screen, and Jake saw his first image of the Void Collective. The beings on the screen were tall and thin, but where the ethereals were graceful and beautiful, these creatures were twisted and dark. They wore armor that seemed to be made of living shadow, and their eyes glowed with a cold, hungry light. They came from the dark spaces between the stars, Lyra explained. No one knows where they originated, but they spread across the galaxy like a plague. They didn't want to conquer worlds or enslave populations. They wanted to consume everything. Matter, energy, even life itself. The screen showed fleets of dark ships attacking peaceful worlds. Jake watched in horror as entire planets were stripped bare, their surfaces turning black and lifeless. How do you fight something like that? We tried everything, Lyra said. Our weapons were powerful, but they were designed to defend and protect, not to destroy. The Void Collective had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. They were faster, stronger, and more ruthless than we could ever be. Jake watched as the images showed the fall of the ethereal covenant. One by one, their beautiful cities were destroyed. Their crystal ships were crushed by the dark vessels of the Void Collective. Millions of ethereals died fighting a war they couldn't win. How did you escape? Jake asked. We didn't, not really, Lyra replied. This facility was built as a refuge, a place where our knowledge and culture could survive even if we did not. Only a few hundred of us made it here before the final battle. She touched another screen, and Jake saw the last stand of the ethereal covenant. Thousands of crystal ships surrounded a massive space station, fighting desperately against an endless swarm of dark vessels. The battle was beautiful and terrible at the same time. We held them off for 3 days, Lyra said. Long enough for the prophet Kepler to make his final vision. He saw across the centuries to this moment, to your arrival. He saw hope where there had been only despair. The screen changed to show an old ethereal with long white hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Jake could see that he was dying, his body fading away like smoke. Kepler used the last of his life force to peer into the future, Lyra explained. He saw a young warrior race that would rise from a small blue world. He saw beings who would never give up, who would face impossible odds with courage and determination. He saw humanity. Jake felt a chill run through him. What exactly did he see? Lyra touched the screen again, and Jake saw something that made his heart stop. The image showed a human pilot in a crashed ship, standing in a desert that looked exactly like the one outside. The pilot looked up at geometric patterns carved in stone, patterns that Jake recognized. He saw you, Jake Morrison, Lyra said softly. Not just someone like you, but you specifically. He saw your face, your name, even the ship you would fly. He saw that you would crash on this world and find your way to me. That's impossible, Jake said, though even as he spoke, he knew it was true. How could he see that far into the future? How could he know about me before I was even born? The universe is not random, Lyra explained. There are patterns, connections that span across time and space. Kefir could see those patterns, follow them like threads in a vast tapestry. He saw that humanity would be crucial to the survival of all life in the galaxy. The screen showed more images of the future, humans and ethereals working together, building ships that combined the best of both technologies. Jake saw human pilots flying craft that seemed to be made of living light and ethereal scientists, learning from human innovation and creativity. "But how can I do any of this?" Jake asked. "I'm just one person. I don't have the authority to make treaties or alliances. I don't even know if my own people will believe me when I tell them about you." "The prophecy was clear about that too," Lyra said. She touched the screen one more time, and Jake saw an image that made his breath catch. It showed him standing before a group of human officials, but he was different somehow. Older, more confident, and wearing robes that seemed to be made of starlight. "You will become the first human to master ethereal technology," Lyra said. "You will learn to use our ships, our weapons, our healing arts. You will become a bridge between our peoples, showing humanity what they can become while showing them how to defend themselves against the Void Collective." "The Void Collective is still out there?" Jake asked. "Oh yes," Lyra said, and her voice was grim. "They have been searching for this facility for 500 years. They know that if they can find and destroy the last remnants of ethereal knowledge, they will have won completely. No one will be able to stop them from consuming the entire galaxy." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again. "So I'm not just here to learn about your people. I'm here to help save mine." "Yes," Lyra said simply. "The prophecy showed that humanity will face the Void Collective within the next 50 years. Without ethereal technology, without the knowledge stored in this facility, your people will suffer the same fate as mine." Jake looked around at the incredible technology surrounding them. "What do I need to learn?" "Everything," Lyra said. "How to pilot our ships, how to use our weapons, how to understand our science. But more than that, you need to understand what it means to be a guardian of life in the universe. The ethereals were not just advanced beings. We were protectors, teachers, healers. If humanity is to take our place, they must learn not just our technology, but our values." Jake thought about his own people, about their history of war and conflict. Humans aren't always peaceful. We fight each other. We make mistakes. We can be cruel and selfish. "Yes," Lyra agreed. "And that is why the prophecy chose you. Humans have flaws, but you also have something that my people lost, the ability to adapt, to grow, to become better than you were. The ethereals became too peaceful, too trusting. We couldn't change when we needed to. Humans can." She walked to the center of the room and gestured to all the screens around them. "This is why I've waited for you, Jake Morrison. Not just to pass on our knowledge, but to help humanity become something new. Something that combines ethereal wisdom with human strength. Something that can finally defeat the Void Collective." Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was asking him to do. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." "You are," Lyra said with complete certainty. "The prophecy would not have chosen you if you weren't. And you won't be alone. I will teach you everything I know, and together we will prepare for what is coming." She walked over to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. Jake felt that strange tingling sensation again, and somehow he felt stronger, more confident. "The first lesson begins now," she said. "Are you ready to learn what it means to be a guardian of the galaxy?" Jake looked into her violet eyes and saw the hope of an entire civilization resting on his shoulders. It was terrifying and inspiring at the same time. "I'm ready." Lyra smiled, and for the first time since she had awakened, Jake saw real joy in her expression. "Then let us begin. The universe is waiting." Over the next several days, Lyra began teaching Jake about ethereal technology and culture. She started with simple things like how to operate the facility's basic systems and how to communicate with the crystal computers that ran everything. Jake was amazed at how responsive the technology was to thought and intention rather than physical controls. Your people build machines that you control, Lyra explained as she showed him how to activate a healing chamber. We grew technology that worked with us, that responded to our minds and emotions. It is more efficient and much more personal. Jake placed his hand on a crystal panel and concentrated the way Lyra had taught him. The panel glowed softly and displayed information about his physical condition. It could tell him his heart rate, his stress levels, even his emotional state. "This is incredible," he said. "How does it know all this?" "The crystals can read the energy patterns that all living beings produce," Lyra said. "They can sense not just your physical health, but your thoughts and feelings as well. This is how we built a society without crime or conflict. Everyone's intentions were always known." As the days passed, Jake learned more about what the Ethereals had been like as a people. They had lived for thousands of years each, spending centuries perfecting their arts and sciences. They had no concept of money or ownership. Everything was shared freely among all members of society. Wars were unthinkable to them because they could sense each other's emotions and always sought harmony. "It sounds like paradise," Jake said one evening as they sat in the garden chamber, watching the glowing plants sway in the artificial breeze. "In many ways it was," Lyra agreed. "But it was also our weakness. We became too trusting, too naive. When the Void Collective came, we couldn't understand beings who felt no compassion, no desire for harmony. We kept trying to negotiate and find peaceful solutions even as they destroyed our worlds." Jake had been telling Lyra about human history in return, and she was fascinated by humanity's struggles and conflicts. "Your people have fought terrible wars," she said. "You have committed acts of great cruelty against each other. Yet you have also shown incredible courage and the ability to learn from your mistakes. We're not perfect," Jake admitted. "We can be violent and selfish, but we also never give up. When humans are pushed to the wall, we find a way to fight back." "That is exactly why the prophecy chose your people," Lyra said with a smile. "The Ethereals were too peaceful to defeat the Void Collective. But humans have the strength to fight and the wisdom to know when fighting is necessary." As Jake learned about ethereal technology, he began to understand just how advanced their civilization had been. They had developed faster than light travel, using ships that could fold space itself. Their weapons could destroy entire fleets without harming the crews, instead disabling ships and allowing their occupants to surrender. Their medical technology could heal almost any injury and extend life for millennia. "Why don't you use this healing technology on yourself?" Jake asked one day after Lyra had used a crystal device to heal a cut on his hand instantly. "You could live forever?" Lyra looked sad. "I could extend my life, yes. But what would be the point? I am the last of my kind. I have no people to return to, no culture to preserve. I have lived for over 500 years already, waiting for you to arrive. That is long enough for anyone." Jake felt a strange pain in his chest at her words. Over the past week, he had grown to care about Lyra more than he had expected. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, but more than that, she was brave. She had sacrificed everything to preserve her people's knowledge for a future she would never see. "Maybe you don't have to be alone anymore," he said quietly. Lyra looked at him with surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you could come with me when I return to human space. You could help teach my people directly. You wouldn't have to be the last ethereal anymore. You could be the first teacher of a new age." For a moment, Lyra's face lit up with hope. Then the light faded and she shook her head. "It is a beautiful thought, Jake, but it cannot be. The prophecy was very clear about what must happen. I am to teach you everything I know, and then you are to carry that knowledge to your people. I am meant to remain here." "Prophecies can be wrong," Jake said, surprised by how much he wanted her to come with him. "Not this one," Lyra said firmly. "Kethra-S visions have never been incorrect. I have a role to play, and so do you. We cannot change our destinies." As the training continued, Jake began to master some of the simpler ethereal technologies. He learned to pilot their small transport vehicles using thought commands. He practiced with their weapons, which used focused energy rather than projectiles. He studied their star charts and navigation systems, which were far more advanced than anything humans had developed. But the most amazing thing was, when Lyra took him to see the ships, the hangar was enormous, carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. Inside were a dozen vessels that took Jake's breath away. They were beautiful beyond description, looking more like works of art than military craft. Their hulls seemed to be made of crystallized light, and they hummed with barely contained power. "These are the last ships of the ethereal fleet," Lyra said with pride. "Each one is unique, grown rather than built, and bonded to its pilot for life." Jake approached the nearest ship, a sleek fighter about the size of his crashed Lightning. Strike, but infinitely more elegant. As he got closer, the ship began to glow brighter, and he could feel it somehow reaching out to him. "It likes you," Lyra said with amazement. "That is very unusual. Ethereal ships usually only bond with ethereals." "Can I try to pilot it?" Jake asked. "That would be very dangerous," Lyra warned. "If the bonding process goes wrong, it could kill you. And even if it works, flying an ethereal ship requires complete harmony between pilot and vessel. One wrong thought could destroy both of you. But if it works, I could learn to fly it." Lyra studied him carefully. "Why is this so important to you?" Jake thought about his answer. "Because I need to be able to protect what matters to me, my people, this facility, and ... He paused, then met her eyes. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Jake realized that somewhere in the past week, he had fallen in love with this alien princess who had waited 500 years for him to arrive. And from the way Lyra was looking at him, he thought she might feel the same way. "The bonding ceremony is very dangerous," she said softly. "But if you are determined to try, I will help you." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Lyra taught Jake meditation techniques that would help him merge his consciousness with the ship's crystal brain. She showed him how to open his mind completely, to let the ship's intelligence flow into his thoughts without losing himself in the process. "Remember," she said as they stood before the glowing fighter, "the ship is alive in its own way. It has its own personality, its own desires. You must work with it, not try to control it." Jake placed his hands on the ship's hull and felt a jolt of electricity run through him. The ship's consciousness touched his mind, alien but somehow familiar. Images flashed through his thoughts, memories of space battles, of flying through nebulae, and between stars, of the joy of perfect flight. For a moment, Jake thought he would be overwhelmed by the ship's powerful mind. Then he felt Lyra's hand on his shoulder, and her presence in his thoughts helped steady him. The ship's consciousness wrapped around his own, and suddenly they were one being with two parts. Jake opened his eyes and found that he could see through the ship's sensors as well as his own. He could feel its engines like muscles in his own body, its weapons like extensions of his arms. The ship was eager to fly, to stretch its crystalline wings in the void of space. "Incredible," Lyra breathed. "I have never seen a bonding happen so quickly or so completely." "You were meant for this, Jake Morrison." Jake smiled at her, feeling more alive than he ever had before. "When do we test it?" "Soon," Lyra said. "But first, there is something else I must show you. Something that will help you understand why the prophecy brought us together." She led him to a chamber he had never seen before, one that was hidden deep in the heart of the facility. Inside was a single crystal, larger than any he had seen, that pulsed with a warm golden light. "This is the heart of memory," Lyra said. "It contains the complete knowledge of our civilization, every scientific discovery, every work of art, every moment of wisdom we accumulated over millions of years. When you are ready, you will take this crystal with you to human space." Jake stared at the crystal in awe. "All of your people's knowledge is in there?" "Yes, And when you connect it to human computers, your people will have access to technology that could transform your civilization overnight. But more than that, they will have access to our wisdom, our understanding of what it means to be guardians of life in the universe. Jake reached out to touch the crystal, and immediately his mind was filled with visions of what humanity could become. He saw human cities that rivaled the beauty of the ethereal capital. He saw human pilots flying ships of light between the stars. He saw his people taking their place as protectors of the galaxy, standing against the darkness of the void. Collective,